Dr. Ann Shippy is a physician, scientist, engineer, and if that's not enough, how about a mom? That's probably the biggest job of all.
It
She's
is.
the author. She's the author of Shippy Paleo Essentials and the Mold Toxicity Workbook. We're going to get into all the mold stuff because it's a big deal and we need to talk about this. She has successfully treated conditions ranging from near fatal toxicity to neurological disorders, autoimmunity, infertility, and beyond. Are you ready, folks? Ready to detoxify and heal? I love that word heal. Just sounds good. Well, buckle up. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Shippy.
Thanks so much for having me. It sounds like we're going to have a really fun conversation.
Listen, we got to get a lot of this word out there on things because I think, I was just talking to one of the producers earlier and I said, the human body, if you think about it, it's the same body that we had 100, 200, 500 years ago. I mean, it's the same body that like cavemen walked around, right? Two lungs, a heart, two kidneys, like the whole thing, right? But it's now the environment that we live in that's created the challenges for us to exist. You almost want to go back to the caveman days with dinosaurs, and we didn't have all these crazy stuff around us. So first of all, super excited to have you. And I know your story's rather interesting. And I want, first of all, for you to talk to us a little bit. Tell us about your roots and how you got to where you are now. I think that's critical.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was just having this conversation with a patient earlier today because I feel like my own body, my health journeys have actually been my greatest blessings. And when you're in the midst of it, it's really hard to see that there's anything good that's going to come out of it. But
Right.
the first one that I went through was I was on the fast track at IBM, chemical engineer, managing big groups of people, getting to do really cool things like get hydrochlorocarbons out of our manufacturing processes so that we'd have a cleaner environment. And I just went downhill health-wise really quickly after a vacation. I went from feeling like I could conquer the world to like hardly function, wasn't keeping weight on. People around me, my employees and peers really thought I was potentially dying. I looked like I had cancer. And I went from doctor to doctor in the allopathic model and I didn't get any answers. So then I started thinking outside the box, went to, a whole bunch of different kind of people approaching the body differently, everything from acupuncture to a naturopath to herbalist, just, some doctors that were doing leading edge immunotherapy. And then I was reading everything I possibly could get my hands on. It was before the internet. It's like lots of different
there's an element of desperation there, right?
Oh my gosh.
And I'm going to guess, and I think you're going to shake my head and go, yep. But I bet you a lot of people were saying, well, you're just stressed.
Oh yeah.
Right.
But I wouldn't accept that because
well, good. Because a lot of us, and what you're working at IBM. It's a high stress job, this and that. People are like, oh, you just got back from vacation. You're just stressed out coming back to work. I'm sure you heard that. And good for you that you're like, okay, yeah, I am stressed. Who isn't these days or even those days? Mm-hmm. But you took it to another level.
Yeah. So I think about stress as changing the threshold of how things work in your body, but I don't think about it as being the main trigger for an event like that.
Right.
And so I'm sure it did play somewhat of a role, and I'm sure it's played a role in my other health journeys as well. But it gets to be a feed forward loop, right? The worse you feel, the more stressed you feel, right?
Right. That's actually a great point. And then it's just like, yeah, you're circling the drain and you're just kind of going round and round and round. It's frustrating. So you decided at that point, you're like, okay, I want to become a healer. I want to go into medicine. So you were one of these people when I was in med school that I remember seeing like parents in med school. And I thought to myself, how are they doing this? Because I'm barely getting by and I just have me. And you were a mom at this point, right?
Well, I actually was pregnant during my second year of med school, had my first child right during the first rotation of third year, when you start.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
And here I'm 34 at this time. And So,
Wow.
advanced age for medical school. And then, yeah, running around having babies. And then I had my second. I was pregnant during the second year of residency, and then he came right at the beginning of third year of residency. So yeah, that put a little, so to go from where you're, you feel like you're practically dying to be well enough to have babies at 34 and 38 in med school and residency, where you're, not getting sleep
Oh,
every third or fourth night. It's pretty amazing.
I bet.
That's just one of the things about how incredible the body is and the capability of healing.
It's incredible. So I think one of the most important things in terms of sort of foundation and scaffolding for what we're going to talk about is you hear the terms functional medicine, integrative medicine, alternative medicine. So can you kind of break that down, briefly for us in terms of, so people have an idea of, like, when you hear these terms, what does this actually mean?
Mm-hmm. So I think about alternative medicine is it's kind of a slang term that's really anything other than allopathic. So,
Okay.
MD, here's
Perfect.
the drug, here's the test. Integrative is more putting things together, like considering adding in acupuncture or considering adding in herbs, meditation, all these other modalities of healing in whatever particular way that the patient and the practitioner want to put them together. And then functional medicine is more specific. It's a particular framework that is very science-based and looking at systems biology. So looking at how one organ system affects the other. Like, you can't just look at what's going on with the heart. It's really what's going on in the whole body, the endocrine system, the immune system, and all of these things working together.
Gotcha. Okay. Now we're going to dive into mold, but I want you to talk about your personal journey with mold. I mean, this was a major deal. So let's kind of talk a little bit about that, first of all.
Yeah, so I was trucking along. I had started my functional medicine practice and was into it several years. And I was starting to look for where else can I get additional continuing medical education that actually helps me to be a better doctor in this realm. And I had gone to Dr. Bill Ray's environmental health conference. And it was the first time I'd ever heard anything about toxic mold being a factor. We're not taught about that in medical school.
Right.
And, you can get aspergillosis in your organ systems, especially in the lungs, right? And
right.
I was like, I think I've been missing this in some of my patients. So I went back to practice and I was like, oh my gosh, there are 3 or 4 patients that I think have toxic mold. And it was kind of an introduction to toxic mold, but there wasn't a really good philosophy for how to approach the patients. It was just more like, here it exists and here are some of the symptoms to be looking for. And then about 9 months later, I started to have some really strange symptoms. And it didn't dawn on me that this could be me because it was so early in my understanding of mold. So, I went to my most trusted allopathic colleagues. I went to a neurologist. I went to an infectious disease specialist. I went to a rheumatologist because I was having so much pain in my body that it was hard for me to even have my kids hug me. I couldn't wear heels anymore because my foot was bothering so much. And the most concerning thing was, well, other than my hair falling out, and I was, it's like, oh my God,
that's concerning. Yeah. I would be concerned as well.
But
check. All right.
Such neurological symptoms that if I held a glass that was full, sometimes it would slip out of my hand. So my right arm was getting
So I did a lot. I'm curious. Were doctors bringing up the term fibromyalgia?
Not
when you talk about pain in the body?
But, ALS. Didn't think
right.
I had ALS though. I also had some of the muscle fasciculations that people see with ALS and some severe muscle cramping and things. So, I didn't quite fit in the MS, the ALS category, but I, had definite neurological findings on my exam.
So what did you do? So like, I mean, you're now thinking of your 3 patients. So you're like, oh my gosh, I think I have 3 patients that may have this. And then like 9 months later, you're like, oh my God, I think I may have this. So what happens?
It still didn't dawn on me because the leak in my house wasn't obvious at that point. One of my patients who I was working on with chemical sensitivity, she came in one day when very momentous day. It was one of those days where I dropped a glass in the morning. Once she was doing great, she leaned over the table and she's like, Dr. Shippy, I can tell you're really sick. And I think chitomium is making you sick. And I want to know what time you get off work because I'm going to come to your house after you get off work. And I have particular symptoms in my body that happen when I get into chitomium again. And I want to see if that's what's going on with you. And I really thought I had it all together that day. I didn't think anybody could tell. I had my makeup on, my hair done. I was, and she came to my house and she walked in the house. And within a few minutes, she had her symptoms. And she said to me, get your kids out of here. Don't spend another night in here and don't take anything with you.
Wow. Like that, just like that.
Just like that.
So what happened?
Well, I took her advice because I was really scared. And I went and I was very fortunate. I was able to stay with my parents and, just started really deeply learning about mold. And again, it's been one of my greatest gifts because I've been able to help my patients by learning how it really works in my own body. And it took me, running multiple mold samples, getting multiple people in to do inspections and finally found the chitomium. So we had a flashing on a chimney that wasn't keeping the water out. Water was running down the chimney through the walls and underneath actually one of my son's beds, and had a pretty major mold problem from that. And then there was probably also some in the air conditioning system.
Were your kids affected at this point?
They don't really like me to talk about it because it's kind of sensitive.
Right. Sure. No, I mean, understandable.
One of my kids, the one that was sleeping on top of it, was dramatically affected. It was affecting his ability to learn in school. He was in 3rd grade at the time. And, we were getting called in to see the teacher on a regular basis because he was so frustrated when she would bring up something new for the kids to learn that he wouldn't be able to control his body. He'd be moving around the classroom, moving around the floor, and just really not the easiest student to deal with. And what was interesting is, so this was kind of in the November timeframe. By the time they went back to school in January after the break, went back in for another parent-teacher conference, and she was like, everything's so much better.
Wow. I mean, dramatic. So let me ask you, so now we have people's ears and they're like, okay, maybe there are a lot of these things. And I think it's important what I tell my patients, my approach to health and wellness is, first of all, you have to do your part, right? You have to do your part in terms of health and nutrition. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but then your environment is a big thing, a huge thing. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but do you think this stuff existed and just, we didn't know about it, say 50 years ago, 100 years ago? Or do you think it's just because of evolution and all the new stuff and, bells and whistles that have now created sort of a place for these molds to live and be present?
I think it's actually both. It actually goes back. I think one of the best documented times is when the Bible was being written. And there's actually references to the priest coming into the home and assessing mold in the Bible.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so.
And it's the same kind of thing mentioned, like practically burn the house down kind of thing, if it's not remediated the first time around. So that's pretty interesting. And then it goes way back in scientific documentation as far as mycotoxins, the mold toxins. So I want to distinguish between allergy, infection, and toxicity. So the allergy is when our immune system is responding, and it's the typical allergy symptoms that we think, all the way to asthma. Infection generally means, it's almost like a colonization or taking over of the fungus in the body, especially for people that are immunosuppressed, but it can really happen to anybody. And then the toxicity is like getting poisoned. So it's the chemicals that the mold makes. One of those categories of chemicals is called mycotoxins. So when those, we generally breathe them in, but they can actually come in through the digestive system or through the skin as well. Those, depending on, I mean, there are thousands and thousands of different ones, and some of those are they poison the mitochondria. They can impact our gene expression, and then they can also damage individual organ systems and cells.
And we're talking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that are affected by this, or maybe.
Yeah. And so that gets to your question, like, is this actually getting worse? And yes, it is. So we are building homes now that have the building materials, the drywall impregnated with mold spores. So it just takes increased humidity or some water damage to activate the mold growth. And then we're building these homes that are very tight for energy conservation. So the chemical production into the air of the mycotoxins, we're breathing them in, and they're so small, they go right into our systems.
And I would imagine it's, as with many things, gradual processes tend to sneak up on you because the change is so limited in its palpability from day to day, from week to week, from month to month, that it's not like, you go to bed fine, you wake up with a sore throat and you have strep throat. It's not like that. It's such a gradual change, right? Like when, someone grows their hair and you haven't seen them for 6 months and they grow their hair, you're like, oh my God, your hair is so long. But to the person growing their hair from day to day, they're like, it looks the same to me. So it's that kind of thing, or no?
It's a great analogy. Yes, it is kind of, if you think about the frog in the pot and doesn't jump out because the temperature's gotten gradually increased, but there can be a tipping point, so I definitely knew something was wrong in that, but then about 5 years later, I got in mold again, and it was just sudden onset adult asthma. Like I just couldn't breathe.
So one of the things that you talk about, and I want you to share this with people, is the DIY solution, right? DIY, do it yourself. So first of all, I'm a big fan of that period, but let's kind of share with the listeners what the DIY solution is, the do it yourself solution. What do you mean by that?
Well, sometimes it's really difficult to find somebody who's an expert in this to guide you. And so that's part of why I wrote the workbook, so that you can start to put the puzzle pieces together for yourself. So, and then we also have a handout that you can get on the website that will also get you started just for free. Just, we just email it to you. So, there's testing that you can do to look at your environment, because a lot of the mold inspectors, especially in the state of Texas, they're not up to date on the latest technology. So they're using these old ways of trying to look for the mold rather than actually, using DNA to see what mold is there, rather than somebody looking at it under a microscope. And then also actually being able to check for the mycotoxins, which are, for me, one of the biggest enemies is, and to be able to check for that in the environment and then also in your body. So there are urine tests that you can get. You can order them yourself from some of the labs that do it. It's to just even see, okay, well, I'm recognizing some of these symptoms. I've got some brain fog. I've got a skin rash. I've got these muscle aches, some of these things that I've talked about. And you're starting to wonder, do I have it? Is this happening to some of my loved ones? You can really get started yourself. And then also in the book, I talk about some of the ways to help to detoxify, as well as there's some rebuilding that has to take place. So
yeah, I love the workbook idea, because in a sense, I do journaling with my patients constantly, and I use this as an example, and, trying to figure out perhaps food intolerances or food sensitivities, right? The spectrum is so grand. But I tell people, what did you have for breakfast 13 days ago? Well, they don't know. I don't know, unless you're one of these people who is so regimented, you eat the same thing every morning for breakfast. But I think the point being, and to your point, with the Mold Toxicity Workbook, is we live a fast-paced life. We don't even know what we had for breakfast yesterday. So we need to create that pathway, right? That sort of scaffolding for, how we eat. What did we do? What did we not do? Did we drink water? Did we drink caffeine? All of these things. And I think that's what I love about the workbook idea, because it's a way for us to slow down the world and really examine our bodies and our function and our things that we do, our don'ts, our do's and don'ts. And I love that you're doing that, because that's what we need, right? We need to like slow down and
Yeah.
think about what we're doing.
And also this can be so overwhelming. First of all, just to not feel good and wonder what's wrong and am I ever going to be able to get better? But then to feel like you have to do everything all at once, so that to kind of break it up into bite-sized pieces that, chew one bite at a time rather than take on the whole hamburger. And and
it's a lot. No, it's totally a lot. And I think, your story is incredible. And I think you hear more and more about mold toxicity and mycotoxins and all of these things. But I think the beauty of, one of the things I love about doing the show is bringing this to the audience and awareness, right? You can't know too much. You really can't. And I think if you have proper guidance from someone like yourself, you can really learn a lot about yourself. So let's deviate a little bit and talk about some autoimmune disorders. I think it's important. So just for the audience sake, again, when we talk about autoimmune disorders, what do you mean when you say that to somebody?
Yeah, so for me, autoimmune is just really simple. It's when the immune system gets confused enough that it starts attacking itself. And so it's probably working on something that needs to be addressed, but as it's working on it, the immune system starts to recognize part of what it's working on as your thyroid or your blood vessels or your cell membranes or your liver, or really any system in the body can be affected by autoimmunity. And so kind of the pillars behind that are, it can be as simple as your gluten genes getting triggered and you just need to cut out gluten. So I've had many people over the years that we've been able to totally turn off this autoimmune process just by changing your diet. But then sometimes it's that plus, having had a mold exposure or heavy metal or pesticide or something that the body's like, we gotta, our barrel's full, we gotta address it. And then sometimes it is just that there's an imbalance in the microbiome. So we have all these good organisms that really cooperate with our immune system to build immunity. But then when there's organisms, and it can be really any of them, parasites, bacteria, viruses, or fungal, that get an upper hand and shift what's going on with the immune system that way. So sometimes we have to address all of those things to get the autoimmunity to reverse.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us, whether, I have sisters with RA, rheumatoid arthritis, and I had an older sister who had sarcoidosis and so these types of, a lot of autoimmune disease, I tend to think of rheumatological stuff, but there are a lot of things that are, to your point, right? GI, gastrointestinal and dietary. I think it's just, it's frustrating to me because I feel like our environment is just building around us and we're constantly having to battle through it. It's amazing that we're still able to live to be 90 years old or longer in this potentially toxic environment. But I think, and I know you feel the same way, which is why I'm going to bring this point up, that otherwise I wouldn't, that we have a lot more control over gene expression and over our bodies by just listening to ourselves, by taking a breather and examining through using, like, for example, your mold toxicity workbook. We have a lot more control. You can't just say, oh, it's genetic. Now, I don't buy that. It's not, to some extent, but how much those genes are expressed, is that fair to say? We have a lot more control over than we think.
Yes, I got to do a TEDx talk about 1.5 years ago, and that's what I did it on. So if you go on YouTube, you can find my TEDx talk on teaching your genes how to behave. And
well, being a mother, you probably have to learn how to teach behavior. So I love that.
It's so beautiful when you think about it that way, because yeah, we all, if you do 23andMe and then you send it through an algorithm like MTHFR support, where you can, look at your methylation and your detox genes and your immune system and all those things, everybody has some polymorphisms or, little glitches that make them more susceptible to whatever's going on in the environment. But it's really tremendous what we can be doing on a day-to-day basis with our lifestyle to make the most of the genes that we got. and so it really...
That's exactly it. Right. You can't just sign off and go, well, this is what I got handed to me, so I'm doomed. Because that's not true.
Well, and when, all this information started coming out on genetics, it was kind of taught that way. Like, oh my God, you've got these genes.
Yeah, you're right. You're totally right.
And 23andMe got in so much trouble for starting to tell people what their genes were, because people really freaked out, right? You've got the wrong ApoE genes, and so you're at risk for heart attack, stroke, and cancer, and oh my God, you're doomed, right? But it's so fun that, okay, all right, I got that. I can see why this happened to my parents and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles, and wow, I'm gonna change that, because I'm gonna really be taking care of my gene expression and avert those things by my lifestyle.
Right. And that's exactly, it's like, one of the things, so one of my dear friends I went to med school with, he's like a brother to me. I've known him now almost 30 years. And he and I, 30 years ago, we were like the typical well, you don't know, because you were like a mature woman when you were in med school. I was a punk. But, so when we were in medical school, we were just living like 22-year-old kids, like, what do we know? And, my friend, he, unfortunately, when we were in medical school, his mother passed away. Basically, long story short, extensive cardiovascular disease. And his mother died when we were in med school, and his father died when we were training.
Oh my gosh.
Strokes, heart attacks, the whole 9 yards. Well, yet he continued to live his life of, eating certain things and following certain diet that he just is just like, well, it's just genetic. Well, about 3 years ago, he was like, I still think it was more of a panic-led thing, but whatever happened, if it leads to health, I don't care how it happens, whether it's a panic attack or anxiety or whatever, it got him to become a lot more sort of self-aware. And he became a whole food, plant-based person. Now, God bless him. I couldn't do it. There's certain animal products I still consume. I always like to use the term plant forward, meaning head that direction, right? Do the best you can. But his thing is that, he's had CT angiograms to look at his cardiovascular structure and this and that. And he has reversed. And in a sense, when you talk about reversing your risk or reversing your potential gene expression, or at least putting it to rest. Look, if you have a 70% risk of something because of gene expression, if you can knock that down to a 30%, how is that not a win? Right? It's like the less likely you are to have some bad thing happen, the better. And through diet and nutrition and health, it affects a ton of stuff. And I know that you're a big, you feel the same way. Again, I bring this up because I know you're going to be like, yes, but diet nutrition has a lot to do with how our body and how our genes express themselves.
Yeah. This whole statement, food is medicine, it just is the truth. And food is information for your genes to know what to be doing. Like if you're eating these foods that I consider inflammatory, so gluten and dairy, sugar, all the chemicals and things like Gatorade, and those are telling the immune system to get going. Like there's stuff to be doing, to do repair and to try to ward these off. And one of the things I love to do is to look at an advanced lipid panel through Boston Heart or Quest, where we can look at markers for inflammation in greater detail than we ever have before. The LPPLA2, the MPO, high sensitivity CRP, the fibrinogen, and evaluate what the dietary changes are doing. And therefore be reducing the risk for the cancer, heart attack, stroke, diabetes, all these things that this current state that we're in with COVID is really, showing the tip of the iceberg. The people whose immune systems are really not working are generally the people that have these underlying low-grade inflammation. And the tools are right there for us to evaluate. You do a diet for 3 or 4 weeks. Maybe you do a vegan or vegetarian, or you, switch over to grass-fed, wild caught kinds of proteins, and you can do little studies and see what your particular body really responds to. Because I think, not everybody feels great on a total vegan, vegetarian diet. I did it for 3 years and then I couldn't do it anymore because my body really needs some animal protein. But then when I look at my cholesterol panel, I'm actually better if I have a very plant forward, like you say. Like plants are almost always the biggest part of my plate.
Right.
And then throw in some good fats and some healthy proteins as much as available for the situation that I'm in. All my markers that show inflammation, that show the autoimmune issues that I've also had in the past, staying really good.
So and I know you have a lot of these lab panels and things on your website to learn more. And I'm a person, let's just say I go onto your website and I look and I see all these labs. Like, how do I know which way to go, or where do I start? Especially for someone who doesn't have medical background. Like, how do you do it?
Yeah, just depending on that's why in my practice, I'm so individualized. I love that, diving deep with my patients based on what's going on with them and what I think the priority is. But I firmly believe, the gut is the center of the universe for our individual bodies. It's where we absorb our nutrients that actually run our biochemistry and physiology. It's 60 to 70% of our immune system. It's a big part of how we detoxify. So if we're going to start with any one thing, I like to start with the gut.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you can't argue with what you put in your body has to have a tremendous impact on everything moving forward. Brain function, heart function, everything. So if you're, it's like putting diesel gasoline in an unleaded car. It's not going to do you very well. It's just not. Or dumping some sugar into a gas tank, you're going to have problems. And I think, again, it goes back to what we were talking about before. We live in this fast-paced world where, people, back in the day, it was like you had an answering machine and you left house and you came back and there was a little red button that would flash that said you had a message and you would hit play. Life was nice then. Now you have to have 10 different ways for someone to get a hold of you immediately. So my point being, and that's a whole nother discussion, my point being, it's just a rapid fire world. And we just think that our bodies are supposed to be able to deal with it. We are not robots. This is not a different species. We have to take care of ourselves. And I think going to someone with your expertise, with your knowledge, is a great place to start, quite honestly.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point. Like I really hope that what's happened over this last year is it's just a wake-up call for everybody to look at these different areas of their life and figure out how they can shore themselves up better. And the whole digital aspect of life is I have just totally quit watching TV. I check social media a couple times a week. I'm very careful who I have conversations with so that they stay as productive and positive and loving as possible, because what I found early on in COVID is that the way I'm wired, I want to take care of the whole, the whole planet. I want to and so what I found is that, the images on TV and and even reading things on the computer started feeling very overwhelming for me.
Yeah.
Because if I can't take action on it, it tips over this plate. So I really try to limit the things that are negative or that can be overwhelming to the things that are in my immediate vicinity of things that I can impact.
I think that's so perfectly said. One of the things I talk about with my patients with stress is that I identify there are two types of stress. There is unavoidable and avoidable. Unavoidable is simply that. I can't stress out over whether the sun's going to come out tomorrow or not, because I don't have control over that. I can't stress out whether it's going to rain tomorrow. Now, I can dress properly. I can take an umbrella. I can drive safely to work, right? So we have control over some things. But to your point exactly, like there's a lot of stuff that we don't. And I think recognizing that is important. And the sooner you recognize that, the better. And I can't agree more with you in that I hope this has been a tremendous wake-up call. My mom used to always say when I was a kid, don't get too big for your britches. And I think we got too big for our britches over the last several decades. And this was a way of some higher entity saying, slow down, take it easy. And, it was a wake-up call. And I hope I couldn't agree with you more. And, it's fortunate for us that there are passionate people like you who go that extra step to do these extra things, to look beyond just, these certain parameters at other things. So now, do you take patients in Austin only, or like, how do we get to you? Let's get to the real big question here. How do we get to you?
One of the two things. One is one of the benefits of COVID has been that I've up until this last year, I've had to have people fly in from out of town or out of the country for their first visit. And then after that, then we can do phone or doxy, which is like Zoom, for follow-up appointments. But because of COVID, they've relieved that issue. I still like to see people in person for the first visit, so I can, listen to their heart and lungs, check their blood pressure, all that kind of stuff. But it's actually been really nice for people to not have to fly in. The other thing is I've been working diligently over the last few months to come up with an online program that I'm calling Be Resilient, Be Immune, and it should be done in the next 3 weeks. And so I do a lot of teaching, step by step on things to be more resilient, be more immune. What I think is important in these times for people to be doing with all these lifestyle things, and then also to help make sure that if and when, most likely when you're exposed to COVID, if you are actually having a life, what to do about it. So if people that are listening and want to tap in that way, we'll be announcing that in the newsletter coming out in the next couple of weeks. So I'm really excited about that. COVID's been a very, like I mentioned when we were getting started, I haven't done very many podcast interviews this year because I've
lucky me and lucky you guys that are listening.
Busy with this project this year because so I had COVID back last March.
Oh, you had it?
I had it last March, and I got it from my first patient that had COVID. He could come in just for a regular visit, and then actually started having symptoms a couple of days later. And I love to give hugs, so I had hugged him hello, hugged him goodbye, and we had checked his blood pressure a couple of times because he was wondering if he was starting to have some issues with blood pressure. And so I think I got a pretty good dose. and then have had over 100 patients in the last year. So I've had lots of experience with how to, take the research that's coming out worldwide, and then what I've seen.
Isn't it? I mean,
myself and
listen, we're going to
patients.
learn so much, right? We're going to learn so much in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years about this nasty thing that has happened to this world.
But what I'm finding is that it's very treatable.
Yeah, very much. I think my thing is, let's not get it in the first place.
Right.
But I'm like you, it's funny because not funny, but it's interesting because you say you like to give hugs. Like this whole thing about wearing a mask, what I hate most about it is I can't see people's face. I like to see the smile. I like to see, you know what I mean? And it's like, I don't care about wearing the mask and it's discomfort, whatever. I'll get over that. It's not going to kill me. But I just like to see someone, a bright face, or a smile or a hello or whatever it is. I'm an old school guy at heart, and, my mom taught me well, bless her. And I just like human interaction. I love that you say you like to hug people because, I feel we're going to get back to better places. We're going to get there. We got to get through this. We're going to learn, unfortunately. But it's man, it's been a real thorn in our side.
Well, and I felt fortunate in that I got COVID early. I still have antibodies, a year later.
Right.
So I have been able to hug people and, be pretty confident I'm not giving them COVID, and I've been able to travel, and I know now what to do from a prevention standpoint with the right supplements and medications when it makes sense. So I have gotten to live somewhat of a more normal life than I think most people have. But on the facial thing, I say I have facial dyslexia. Like, I feel like I really have to see people's full faces to know.
I don't think that's unusual for you and I. I think that's kind of a lot of people. Maybe you don't even recognize it. But, look, we follow the guidelines. We do what CDC tells us to do. I think everybody's trying to do their best here. I don't feel like there's, a huge conspiracy. I think we're just all trying to do our best in this moment of panic and this really kind of thing that's we've never encountered, and just do your best, do what seems like the right thing to do, and take care of your body. And lastly, thank you for spending, I know you, like you said, you've been kind of out of the whole podcast loop, and I feel honored, and as should everybody listening, honored that we got to spend some time with you. It's always enjoyable to speak with colleagues, but even more so with people that I learn from all the time. So thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And this is so fun for me to get to have these great conversations and hopefully inspire your listeners to know how amazing their bodies are and how resilient they are.
There we go. We have to go see Dr. Shippy. Where do we find you? Now the final thing, everyone's like, okay, Mike, shut up. And how do we find Dr. Shippy? So
it's very simple, and shippymd.com. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I've got a great team that helps to put out good information constantly, so that there's, really good blogs and recipes and inspiration on, just taking that, like we talked about earlier, that little, what bite am I going to take today? How am I going to help move my health forward? So
right.
Lots and lots of ideas. And then there are a bunch of handouts. One of the big things that I think is, that I really love that the team and I have put together is one on environmental toxicity. So there's a very in-depth guide on the steps you can take to start reducing this environmental load that, being the frog in the pot and not realizing that the water is coming up to a boil with environmental toxicity.
Well, thank you. And your knowledge is valuable on so many levels. And we're all going to reach out to you, myself included. There's so much. Every time I have a guest on here, I'm like, okay, wait, what was it? How do I get you again? No, seriously. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And now for the weekly RX, great conversation. And I think a couple of nuggets of information that I find helpful is, number one, do your homework. never stop looking for an answer. I think our bodies are incredibly complex. We live in an incredibly complex world and environment, and you just need to do your homework. I love also the idea of the do it yourself. And Dr. Shippy has so many great tools, and the whole sort of do it yourself solution, it is great. I mean, you're your best advocate, right? And lastly, you have more control over your genes and your gene expression than you think. And I think we could probably point towards Dr. Shippy's TED Talk on gene expression. A lot of great stuff. So I hope it was helpful. We'll leave it at that. That's it for today. Don't forget to subscribe for free, download and listen to Wellness Inc. with me, Dr. Mike Moreno, on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Follow me on social at the 17 Day Diet.